I want to share with you my 3 favorite books I read this year when it pertains to preaching. Now, I read 51 books in 2024. I'm going to make a playlist here. I'm going to make a few videos just about reading, the amount of books I read, how to read more of the Bible, all of that. So stay tuned. Look at the description below for this playlist. In this one, I want to talk about my 3 favorite books, again, on preaching. Now, these books, none of them had the title preaching in it, but they are really going to be helpful and have been helpful in my journey of becoming a better preacher. The first book I want to mention, this one's so good, I bought the hard copy. I'm now fully digital pretty much. Andrew Root has a whole series. It started out with 3 books. Now it's at 6 about essentially pastors and the church in a secular age. And he examines Charles Taylor's work just about the secular age that we live in. And most people that I look up to, they're constantly reading Charles Taylor. I'm still too scared to read Charles Taylor's work. I love to read about Charles Taylor's works. And Andrew Root has been my favorite, along with James K. Smith's book, How to Not Be Secular. This book, though, was so helpful for me because I think it gave a framework to help me in my preaching. One key thought from this book, I just finished it, was this idea that we actually are in a more guilt-filled society than ever. And it's because we have shifted from a should society, one that understands there is a God, there is morals, we should follow them, to a could society, where we are now all about performing, and it's about what you can do to make the most of this life. And what it has generated is a group of people, most of us, who are seeking to assuage this guilt either through heroic action or finding your inner genius. Now, I want you to read the rest of it to understand what all of that means. But essentially, it's been helpful for me to understand where the typical person is at in their understanding of what is fulfillment. What guilt do I feel? What is the pressure that I'm experiencing? And the pressure most of us are experiencing are not from God. We have put pressure on ourselves. And it's actually a great segue to the gospel in that, hey, when we become our own judge, that's actually a ruthless judge, and it's never satisfying. But we have Christ who has come to give us ultimate fulfillment and purpose, and that comes through confession and surrender. So I'm honestly still baking these thoughts, understanding how to preach them to my congregation, but there was just so many one-liners and so many helpful tips. This book is so worth reading. The second favorite book this year, it's actually a reread of mine. I think I'm reading it every other year at this point, is Run with the Horses by Eugene Peterson. I picked this book in the category of preaching for a few reasons. One is it's a reminder that a thick, crazy, exhaustive book like Jeremiah can be packaged and themed in such a beautiful way. And there's so much beautiful texture to the story of Jeremiah that it can be delivered in a really good gospel presentation. So if you read Jeremiah, it's easy to get caught in the weeds. And I love how Eugene Peterson is understanding how to take apart, I think it's 10 chapters, and he just shows the general themes and the movements in that book. And one thing is to read and understand Jeremiah's story, but I think another for me as I was studying it this time was just understanding Eugene's approach. How was he able to see this in this Old Testament book that's kind of difficult to preach, and learning those rhythms, those angles that he took, and how can I take that same kind of mentality to another Old Testament book that I would like to preach? So that's one reason. Another is it's just an encouragement to pastors, to those to keep preaching the word. He constantly talks about how it's, let me look at one line I think is so good. Life is difficult, Jeremiah. Are you going to quit at the first wave of opposition? Are you going to retreat when you find that there is more to life than finding 3 meals a day and a dry place to sleep at night? Are you going to run home the minute you find that the mass of men and women are more interested in keeping their feet warm than in living at the risk to the glory of God? It's this encouragement to live courageously and not cautiously. It's to keep preaching the word despite the response. Most of Jeremiah's ministry was pretty barren. At least that's what it seemed to be. Another quote that just stuck out to me was, he says, "We don't have to like it." This is page 88. Jeremiah didn't like it, the opposition, the pushback. He yelled at Pashur. And after he yelled at Pashur, he yelled at God, angry, hurt, and somewhat bewildered that all this was happening to him. He didn't like any of it, but he wasn't afraid of it, because the most important thing in his life was God. Not comfort, not applause, not security, but the living God. What he did fear was worship without astonishment, religion without commitment. He feared getting what he wanted and missing what God wanted. It is still the only thing worthy of our fear. What I love about this book is just this reminder of the holy act of declaring the gospel and this reminder to persevere through trials and tribulations because God is the goal. So I think it's a great book. I think it can bring steel to your spine as a preacher. Again, this year I didn't read a lot of preaching specific books like tactics. Like I think one book I read last year was The Homiletical Plot. So good for preaching. Didn't read that, but I'm still going to put this in a category. Number 3 would be Exalting Jesus in Acts by Tony Merida. So this is more of a commentary. If you're going to be preaching through Acts, which we did as a congregation in all of 2024, Tony Merida is just a great, faithful pastor and commentator. And I just thought his book, Exalting Jesus in Acts, just had a lot of really helpful cultural context, very, very good on application. The beginning of every chapter was a really easy to follow outline. I've noticed, by the way, a lot of people preach like Acts 1 through 12 and then kind of like move on to another book, and that's fine. I'm not like, I've done that with other books before, but I found like 13 and on, preaching that book gets a little bit difficult, especially because of the timelines and sometimes some things slow down. And anyways, Tony Merida gave such a helpful outline for the whole book of Acts that was just a helpful primer and just really put my mind in the right space every single week. Those are my top 3 books when it comes to preaching. In the next video, I'm going to make a video about my top 3 books of leadership that I read in 2024. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you for watching today's video. This is the video I think you should watch. This is the video YouTube says you should watch.